Good evening and welcome to our weekly program on the Parsha, Nitzutzei Sparks, Parsha Tidbits. Small, but hopefully inspirational commentaries on various sections of the weekly Torah portion, which, as the Alter Rebbe, the first Rebbe of Chabad, taught us, is what we live with every week. He said we have to live with the times. And he certainly did not mean any publication with that name that is current today, but it was interpreted to mean that we have to live with the weekly Torah portion. That means if the weekly Torah portion is about Genesis, Bereshis, then we have to live with Genesis. If it's about Noach, we live with Noach and all that which he represents. This week the Parsha is Terumah. Terumah translates as either a contribution, an offering, or that which is uplifting, that which raises something to a higher level. Because in truth, in Judaism, the idea of a contribution is not just something that goes horizontal, it is also vertical. When you give of your own resources to another, whether the other is another human being who is in need, whether it is to the construction of a holy edifice, the Mishkan, the tabernacle as it was in the desert, about which the Torah portion discusses, whether it's for a synagogue, what you're doing is actually two things. You're taking your own resources and moving it in a different direction horizontally to someone else. It could even be someone beneath you, financially or otherwise. But there's also the idea that when you give, you're uplifting the object that you give. You're uplifting yourself with the object that you're giving. So the word in Hebrew, which is one of the secrets of Hebrew, which is called the Lashon HaKodesh, the Holy Tongue, is that one word can have multiple meanings. And these are just two of the meanings that the word has, that you're giving, you're separating from yourself to give to another, and you're also elevating. That's the name of this weekly Torah portion, and it's about contributions that the Jewish people were commanded to give for the construction of the portable sanctuary in the desert, referred to in the Torah as the Mishkan. The word Mishkan, the word is related to a word in Hebrew that means a place of dwelling. When we talk about God, we also use the term Shechina, the indwelling of God, the aspect of God which involves itself within our existence. There's an aspect of God that transcends nature and existence beyond creation, and there's an aspect of God that is within the parameters of this world. And the place in which God is present in this world in the most revealed fashion is the Mishkan, and later on in the Beis Hamikdash, the Holy Temple. So here the commandment is given. This is chapter 25 for those who are following in the text, in the book of Exodus, chapter 25, and it begins with verse 2, where Moses is told by God to speak to the children of Israel and let them take from me a portion or an offering. From every man whose heart motivates him, you shall take my portion. There are different translations of different words over here, but we're not going to focus on the different translations, but on one very obvious question that is based on the language that is used here. It says here, speak to the children of Israel and let them take from me a portion, take from me an offering. Usually when you talk about an offering, it's something that you give. It should have said, v'yitnu li truma, and they shall give me a portion, an offering. But instead of saying they shall give, it says they shall take from me. So there are various explanations. There's one very beautiful explanation that whenever you give, you really take. Or to put it in somewhat different words, the way the Talmud puts it, in reference to a cow and the calf that it nurses, more than the calf wants to get nourished from the cow wants to nourish the calf. The giver gets more out of the giving than the recipient receives out of the giving. So when you give v'yitnu, when you're giving, it's really v'yikhu, you're really taking. And the rationale behind that is as follows. Whatever it is that you give, it's finite. Give someone $1 million, it's finite. And compared to the amount of money that there is in the world, $1 million is not even a penny. Compared to what exists in the universe, it's all meaningless. It has no real value. What makes something have real value, intrinsic value, an infinite value? It's when it's connected to that which is infinite, which of course is God. So when you do a mitzvah by giving something, the very fact that the recipient, the receiver, benefited from it, which made that possible for you to fulfill your mitzvah, your godly commandment, you became attached to something that's infinite. And if it's infinite, it's so much more, infinitely more obviously, than what you've given that person. Just one other dimension, another way of looking at it, the greatest gift you can give someone is the gift of legitimacy, validation, that you count. We are here in this world to achieve certain things that justify our existence, and that is to fulfill God's commandments. So every time we do a mitzvah, we justify our very existence. So that while the recipient is getting $1, $100, $1 million, you're getting legitimacy. And that's the greatest gift you can receive. So v'yikhu, you're taking more than what you're giving. Now, what were they supposed to give? So it lists the things that they were supposed to give, materials with which they would build the Mishkan, and its vessels, and also the priestly garments. And it lists a total of 13 items. Actually, there were 15, but Rashi refers to 13 because two of the items, and there are different interpretations, which two are excluded. Some say the gems, the stones that were given by the Nesiim, the leaders of the tribes, are excluded in the count because it was a donation given only by the elite leaders of the tribes, not by the rest of the Jewish people. Excuse me. So there are 13 primary items. It's very interesting that in secular society, the number 13 is somehow viewed as an unlucky number. People who claim to be rationalists become very superstitious, and they refuse to sit in row 13 of a plane, or some buildings will have the 12th floor, then you go to the 14th floor, there's no 13. And if it's a Friday the 13th, then you're really in trouble. In Judaism, there's no such thing. It's nonsense. Friday is a day in which God says, Ki Tov, it is good, twice. All the other days of the week, only once, except for Tuesday and Friday. So it's a doubly good day because it's preparing for Shabbos. But the 13th is, and that's the relationship to our Parsha, is especially a good and positive number. Number one, the 13 items with which the Mishkan was built. Number two, the 13 attributes of mercy. The Torah says that whenever we're in trouble, and whenever we sin, and we want God to erase our iniquity and to embrace us, we invoke the 13 attributes of mercy, which cover up all of our imperfections. 13 is the age, of course, of Bar Mitzvah, when a Jewish boy becomes an adult and is responsible for observing all of the commandments. A girl becomes Bat Mitzvah at the age of 12, which means she's beginning her 13th year the boy has to wait until he completes his 13th year, and that's based on a passage in the Talmud that women are endowed with greater understanding, so they mature faster. They acquire their spiritual identity faster. What else do we have at 13? There are 13 methods of interpreting the Torah. There are 13 principles of faith. And there are several dozen other 13s. So 13 is a very special number, but I like to relate to the number 13 as it pertains to a bar mitzvah. Because what is a bar mitzvah, and how does it connect to the 13 items of the Mishkan? A bar mitzvah is when the godly soul, which enters into the child at the time of the bris, of the circumcision, or for a girl at the time of her naming, doesn't fully manifest itself within the person until the age of 13. The age of 13, their divine soul makes its dwelling within the individual. We become a mishkan. We become the structure within which God's presence can dwell. And a little bit later in the Parsha, in verse 8, it says, "Make for me a sanctuary, and I will dwell within them." And our sages point out that them means to each individual. So what the Mishkan was, the macro Mishkan, was made up of 13 items. The micro Mishkan is made up of 13 years, which means that every year of a person's life up to the age of 13 contributes one item to the person's function as a Mishkan, as a dwelling for God. So we shouldn't think that, well, what's a one-day-old child going to accomplish? What we do with a one-day-old child, a one-year-old child, is an integral part of the construction of our personal sanctuary. It's also interesting that the number 13 is also the numerical value of the word echad, one. It's the number that symbolizes God's dwelling in this world, which reveals his oneness within this world. And that we accomplish by building the sanctuary. The one that was built in the desert was the first example of such a thing.
Ava, love.
Yes, and the word love is also numerically 13. And there's obviously a connection between the two, because the Mishkan, it was a place where the one God revealed himself, and we reciprocated with giving our offerings, which is an expression of love. Love is where you offer yourself to someone else. And both of these, the unity aspect and the love aspect, were present in the Mishkan. Now, there's an interesting medrash that says, when the Jewish people said to God, when he was presenting them with the option of the Torah, Naseh v'nishma, we will do it, and then we will hear what it's all about. They enthusiastically accepted God's Torah without even knowing what's in it. And that was considered to be a great merit, and the Talmud tells us each Jew was given 2 crowns to wear, one because of saying the words we will do, we will hear, and one is because they said the words we will do before they said we will hear. So that's the Medrash says, when the Jewish people said we will do and we will hear, God said to Moses, tell them they should take these items and give it to the Mishkan. What's the connection? When they said we're going to follow the commandments, God says, tell them to bring these items to build a sanctuary. So the Baal Shem Tov explained, and it's a very beautiful and the obvious explanation of these words of the Medrash, the juxtaposition of these 2 things, we will do and we will hear, bring these 13 items. When a Jew is inspired, it's a beautiful thing, but it won't last unless you immediately translate it into action. So as soon as the Jews said with excitement and enthusiasm, yes, God, we're so excited about you, we're going to do what you want us to do, we don't care what's in it, We have such trust and faith in you. We are so inspired. God says, Moses, tell them right away they should translate that inspiration in action. Let them put their words into practice. Let them contribute to the Mishkan. And as we said before, let them contribute the 13 aspects of their personality, of their life. Put all of what they have within them into the Mishkan. That's how you translate a emotion into action so that it will endure. It says v'yikhu li, in that very same verse. We're going to harp a little bit on that verse, the second verse of the Parsha. It says, they shall take for me. So Rashi says, lishmi, in my name. What does that mean? That when you give the donation to the Mishkan, you should have in mind, I'm doing it for God's name. There's a very beautiful hint over here that applies to any time that we give, whether it's giving to a poor person, giving to a poor and needy cause. You're always doing something that creates an image of God's name. God's name comprises 4 letters, a Yud, and a Hey, a Vav, and a Hey. So this is how one of the commentators explains the significance of giving. When you take a coin out of your pocket, the coin is like a Yud. It's a dot. It has no expansiveness. So you recreated the Yud of God's name. You put it in your hands, which has 5 fingers. It's an expansive part of your body. The 5 fingers, that stands for the Hey, because a Hey is an expansive letter, and Hey in Hebrew is also 5. Then when you stretch out your arm with a coin in it, that resembles the Vav. It's a straight line. And then when the poor person opens up his hand and takes the coin, that's his Hey, his 5 fingers. So when you give tzedakah, you're recreating God's name. That's what it means. You shall take for me, for my name. You shall always give by initiating the process of giving. Don't wait for the poor person to come to you. Don't wait for the needy cause to come to you, because then what happens then is that the poor man stretches out his hand. So you started the Vav and the Hey before the Yud and the Hey. That's reversing the order of God's name. Now, going on to the different items in the Mishkan, as we said before, there are 13 items. The first 3 that are mentioned are Zahav, gold, Chesed, and silver, Nechoshes, and copper. Gold, silver, and copper. The Rebbe asks the question, they're not listed in ascending or descending order. If you go in ascending order, it would be copper, then silver, then gold. That's verse 3. If it's descending order, it would be gold, silver, and copper. So why is it listed in descending order? It should be in ascending order, because most people can give copper. Some could also give silver. And some, fewer, could give gold. So it would have been more appropriate to list it in ascending order rather than in descending order. And in general, the Rebbe says, gold was something that not everyone had a large amount of, and the Mishkan didn't need that much gold. So why is it mentioned first? And the Rebbe, in a very lengthy discourse, in fact, it was the last talk we heard from the Rebbe to date, and the Rebbe says, it's not talking about the commodity of gold, the metal gold. It's talking about the attitude of the person who gives it. That everyone, even someone who externally looks like he's not gold, he doesn't look like he's even silver, he looks like he's more copper or less than that, the truth is that he is truly gold. Even someone who you think does not have the greatest intentions, does not have the sincerity, that's true perhaps externally, but the inner dimension of a Jew is that he is gold, and when he gives, he's giving from, or she's giving from his or her very core, very essence, which is gold. One of the other items, which is listed in the verse after the next, which is verse 5, was Atse Shittim, Shittim wood. They translate that as acacia wood. And the question is asked by Rashi from earlier sources, where did they get acacia wood from? In the desert, there's not much wood. And Rashi quotes a midrash. Rabbi Tanchuma was one of the great Talmudic sages who interpreted the Torah in a midrashic, in a homiletical way. And the Rebbe emphasized that the name of this person, the author of the following statement, Tanchuma, means consolation. And as we'll soon see, these are words of consolation. That Jacob, knowing that the future will bring the Jews into the desert, when they'll have to build a mishkan, a tabernacle, a sanctuary, planted acacia trees so that when the Jews left Egypt, they took it with them, and with that they built the mishkan. And the Rebbe says this is an appropriate lesson for a rabbi who has a name Tanchuma, which means consolation, just like the name Menachem means consolation, or Nachum. These are various Jewish names that are associated with the idea of consolation. When do you need consolation? When you're grieving. When the Jews were in Egypt and enslaved in Egypt, what did Jacob do? Jacob says, I'm going to plant trees so that the Jewish people, even in their time of slavery and suffering, are going to know that they're going to get out of this and that they will eventually be free people who will be able to even build a sanctuary for God. This is a very powerful lesson for our own day and age. As we stand in the last moments of Golus, of exile, we have to remember all of the words of inspiration and comfort that we've heard for thousands of years, and especially in the most recent past, that the Rebbe has told us that the redemption is imminent, and all the preparations were made. That should give us comfort, knowing that this Golus, this exile, will end, and very soon, imminently, we will enter into the period of the Messianic age, led there by Mashiach, a righteous Redeemer. Now we go on to the first of the vessels in the temple. The very first vessel was the Aron, was the ark. That's in verse 10. The ark was made in several parts. Number one, it was a box, 2.5 cubits by 1.5 by 1.5, 2.5 long, 1.5 wide, 1.5 deep. That's a question that is asked, why halves? Why can't they have whole dimensions? The Kli Yakar, one of the major commentators of the Torah, asked that question and answers, because Torah, we have to recognize, is beyond our ability to fathom. As much of Torah that we know, we only could know 1/2 of it. We're not capable of mastering all of the Torah. And it's on 3 levels: the breadth, the depth, and the length. What does that mean, breadth, depth, and length? Breadth means Torah it says, Rechava mini yam, it's wider than the sea. Wider means that it has so many details. Every subject in Torah, if we would know all the details, we discover it's colossal. There's so many parts of it. The breadth of it is breathtaking. And as much of Torah that we could study and master, there's so much more. Right now, we can get online, or you can get in a hard drive, tens of thousands of Torah books. So as much as you think you could learn and know, there are tens of thousands more that are available. and who knows how many more tens of thousands that have yet to be made available and accessible to everyone. So that's the width of Torah, the breadth of Torah. Then you have the depth of Torah. As much as you understand, and as deep as you can go, you realize that it goes deeper and deeper and deeper. It's unfathomable. And the same thing is true with length. Length means taking the Torah from one level and bringing it down to the next level. No matter how many times you learn Torah, you realize that you can take the Torah and explain it to someone else and bring it down from one generation to another. Torah will never end. It's a transmission that will continue forever and ever. So Torah is beyond any measure in terms of its breadth, in terms of its depth, and in terms of its length. Now, the ark had 3 boxes actually. Rashi explains that it had a wooden box made out of acacia wood, as the Torah says, and there was another box made out of gold inside, inserted inside of it, and another box made of gold in which the wooden box and the inner golden box was inserted. So you had a golden box on the outside, a golden box on the inside, and a wooden box in between. And then it was coated with gold, so it looked like it was entirely made out of gold. Now, what is the significance of having, it says in the Torah, mibayis, inside was gold, and mechutz, and the outside was gold? What does that signify? So again, commentators say, it reminds us of a passage in the Talmud. When Rabbi Gamliel was the Nasi, the leader of the Sanhedrin, the leader of the Jewish people, for reasons that we won't go into right now, was deposed. And they appointed in his place another sage, Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah, whose teachings we recite in the Haggadah of Passover. Now they had a fundamental difference in their conditions for entry into the academy. Rabbi Gamliel put a guard at the door and he said, whoever's inside is not like his outside cannot come in. And he had very few students. Rabbi Lazar removed the guard, the bouncer, and the whole place filled up with students. So both approaches have legitimacy. There are times when you have to be very selective what kind of students you bring into the academy to make sure that there is no room for compromising the values and watering down the principles upon which the Torah is based. And there are times when you have to include everyone because we can't afford the luxury of turning someone away, hoping that eventually he may come back. So we're not going to take sides over here. But let's focus on the first approach, that your inside has to be like your outside. The ideal, because even when you opened up the academy for everyone, the hope was that whoever comes in will eventually reach that level where his inside and his outside will be the same. But I'd like to make a very simple and obvious observation. There were 3 boxes, so the middle one was not gold. What does that tell you? I think it tells us a very profound truth about the way God looks at us. We externally do good things, but sometimes we feel, you know what, we're not that sincere. We're not doing it for the right reasons. We're not putting our full heart and soul in it. And sometimes we discredit ourselves and others who we say are insincere. And the answer to that, the response to that is that no, deep down in the core of our being, we are sincere. Because our soul, which is within us, is certainly sincere. So in effect, if we look at a person who does good, and you think the person is not sincere, you have to look at the person on 3 levels. There's the external, there's the core, and there's everything in between. We have to be content, at least to a certain extent, if the outside and the core are both on the same page. What happens in between, what's sandwiched in between, is less important. Little by little, the outside and the inside will chip away at the center, that which is in between, and ultimately allow it to become more and more consistent with the outer behavior and the inner core. But the person who says, you know what, I'm not sincere yet, but my inner core is, but doesn't manifest that externally, has missed the whole point. The whole point is that our external should match the core. What's in between, sandwiched in between, is not as important. Now, the ark had to be carried with two staves, two poles, and they were never to be removed. They always had to stay in the ark. Rabbi Nosson Adler, one of the great German sages of the 19th century, explained that the ark itself symbolizes Torah, because it had the tablets in it. According to one opinion, a Torah scroll was also inside the ark. The other opinion says it was right alongside the ark. But both agree that the ark was associated with the idea of Torah. The poles represent the people who support those who study Torah, the support system. The Jewish people had the 12 tribes. One tribe was Yisachar, they were the scholars. The other tribe was Zvulun, they were the merchants. And they supported the scholars, and it was considered as if they had a share in the Torah study of the scholars. Now, we're also told that while people would carry the ark, the truth was the ark carried the people. When they had to go across the Jordan, the ark picked the people up who carried it and transported them over the river. So the ark carries the supporters. And that's the truth, he said. While people who give charity to support good causes, specifically the cause of learning Torah, deserve credit and get credit for supporting it, they have to realize they are being supported by the Torah scholars more so than they are supporting the Torah scholars. It ties in with what we said at the beginning, that the one who receives, the one who gives, gets more than the one who receives. Well, similar concept over here. You think you're the supporter, but no, you're being supported by the ark, by the Torah. Another thing about the ark, that it was the most miraculous thing that there was in the entire Mishkan. The Mishkan in general was, and the Beis HaMikdash that they built later on, was a source of miracles, many miracles. The Mishnah lists 10 miracles, but there were many, many more miracles. One of them was the menorah. One of the branches of the menorah, it's called the western branch, and we're not even sure which one is the western one. There are different opinions, but whichever that one was, it would never extinguish on its own. It had to be extinguished so it could be relit. That was one of the miracles in the temple. But the greatest miracle was the ark had no measurements, even as it had measurements, which means the ark was made out of gold and wood, and it had to be 2.5 cubits long by 1.5 wide by 1.5 deep, 2.5 long to 1.5 wide and 1.5 deep. But if you measured the temple from side to side, it was just as wide with the ark and without the ark. It means the ark did not occupy any space. If you measured it from one wall to the ark and from the other wall to the ark, it was the same as if you measured it without the ark. Yet the ark did occupy space at the same time that it didn't occupy space. It defied the laws of physics, to be sure. But what lesson is in it for us? I mean, we can't play tricks like that. We can't do that. It impresses us that God is beyond measure, beyond limits. That's true. But what is the practical lesson for us? So Rabbi Nosson Adler said, it tells us that Torah transcends space and time. Wherever you are, you can study Torah. Torah does not have to be studied in a synagogue, in a house of study. Every place in the world is a place to study Torah. And every time is a time for Torah. Time in the sense that you can't say, well, Torah was relevant 1,000 years ago, 2,000, but not today. There's no time and no place which Torah cannot apply. That is in contradistinction to a mitzvah. There are mitzvahs that can only be done at certain times and certain places. There's a mitzvah to put on tefillin. You can only put on tefillin during the day, not at night, only in the weekdays, not Shabbos. You could learn about tefillin, the Torah, anytime, in any place, which is only true of Torah study. Now we go on from the Ark. We're not going to cover all the parts of the Mishkan, but we'll just try to cover a little bit more. The Ark, the menorah, rather, that's in chapter 25, verse 31, was made out of one piece of gold. You shall take a menorah of pure gold, hammered out shall the menorah be made. Its base, its shaft, its cups, its knobs, and its blossoms shall be hammered from it. And then 6 branches from each side, 3 branches on the one side, 3 branches on the other side. Then it goes on to describe the various ornaments, the cups, the blossoms, the knobs, that the menorah was made of. But it was one piece of gold for everything. Yet the ark, which was a holier vessel, was made of 2 separate pieces of gold. And then there was a covering, which was a 3rd piece of gold. So the menorah was unique that it had to be made out of one piece of gold. What does the menorah symbolize? It symbolizes 2 things. Number 1, it symbolizes Torah. The Torah is one Torah. The ark also symbolizes Torah, but the ark symbolizes the part of Torah which deals with God and spirituality, where there's no danger that a person might think that it has many different parts to it, and therefore it's not a unified Torah. No, it's obvious that if it's God's Torah that deals with godly matters, that it's one. But the menorah symbolizes the part of Torah that is revealed, not the inner part, not the spiritual dimension. Well, if it's revealing the God's teachings, one is likely to distinguish between one part and another part, that they're not all equal, they're not all unified. The Torah says no, the menorah is one piece of gold. All of Torah is part of that oneness, is one God, one Torah, and also one Israel, one Jewish people. And that's another symbolism of the menorah. The 7 branches of the menorah are said to symbolize the 7 different character traits, 7 attributes that make up the entire body of the Jewish nation. We can all be divided into one of these 7 attributes. Some of us are more into chesed, kindness and love. Some are more into gevura, judgment and awe and reverence, and so on and so forth. And all of them are made up of one piece of gold. The differences are external. We are all really one people. Another interesting thing about the menorah was that its branches were not round. Yes, in this edition that I'm looking at, it has round branches, but the art scroll that produced this in their later edition corrected it, because both Rashi, the greatest Ashkenazic authority of the last 1,000 years, greatest Talmudic authority, insist that the branches of the menorah were not round, but were on an angle, straight angles. And it's really explicit word in the Torah. The branches are called kanim. kanim, the word kanim are reeds. Reeds are shoots that come out of the ground that go straight up. So the Torah describes these branches as going straight up. The reason why people depict it as round, because on the Arch of Titus, the man who destroyed our temple and enslaved us depicted it as round, which is more consistent with Roman and Greek art and architecture. That menorah on the Arch of Titus is certainly not the way the menorah looked in the temple for many reasons. One of them was it had a snake on it. That was certainly not a symbol they would use in the temple, and is of course not mentioned anywhere that the menorah had that. Secondly, the menorah in the temple had legs. This one did not have legs. So they just depicted a menorah. Perhaps it was one of many menorahs that existed that the Jews had with them, that the Romans took into exile. And the Rebbe insisted that we depict the menorah the way the Torah does, and not the way the forces of exile, the murderous Roman Empire that murdered over 1 million Jews and destroyed our temple and initiated the bitter period of exile for close to 2,000 years, should not be the source of how we depict our own holy objects. Another related subject is the tablets. Whenever you see tablets depicted, they're round on the top. That's the way Michelangelo, I believe, depicted the tablets. That's not the way the tablets were. They were cubes. So we should, when we draw pictures of the tablets, they should be drawn consistent with our own tradition, not the way it's imposed on us by outside influences who didn't really have the correct information. And many other similar ideas that we have to look inward to find our tradition and what it says about these objects. Now, in between, before we had the menorah, it also had a table. The table had bread on it. Actually, it wasn't bread, it was matzah. It was kosher for Passover. That was eaten by the Kohen every Shabbos. They would take it off the table and they would give it to the Kohen. And a miracle happened. I mentioned before there were so many miracles in the temple that it would stay warm a whole week. It wasn't hot. There was no heat there, no fire there, but it was miraculously hot, even though it stayed on the table a whole week. The table was the source of physical nourishment for the world. Why do they need a table in the temple to give bread to the Kohen? They couldn't give bread to the Kohen from outside the temple. In truth, do you know how much bread every Kohen got? The Talmud, when it talks about refined speech, tells a story about how the Kohanim, the priests, when they got the bread, each one got a little tiny piece. And one of them said, I got the size of a barley. And another one says, I got the size of a lizard's tail, or something like that. It was very disrespectful. And they investigated that Kohen, and they found out that he was not even a kosher Kohen. The fact that he used such unrefined language was a sign that he wasn't so kosher. But anyway, we see over there that it's revealing that you got almost nothing. There were so many priests around, and how much bread was there, not enough to give you more than just a little piece. So then why do they need to have bread on the table in the temple? And the temple itself was made up of a courtyard. That's where they would bring all the sacrifices. That's where most of the activity occurred. That was outside. And then you had the sanctuary inside, and there you had 3 different vessels. One was the golden altar that we're going to read about next week. That had the incense on it. Then you had the menorah and the table. The table was on the north side. The menorah was on the south side. Now, the menorah, we know, is light. Light is a spiritual symbol. It symbolizes the light of Torah, God's light. That we understand. The incense, we can understand incense is a way of serving God by burning the incense. And we'll talk more about that next week, God willing. But what is the symbolism of a table with bread on it? What is that supposed to indicate? And the answer is that we all have to know that where do all of our material benefits come from? They come from the temple. They come from God via the temple. The temple was not just a shrine. People would come here to pray and to give whatever they have to God. It's the place that God gives us. We're being given much more through the temple, to the point that the Midrash says that if the nations of the world would have appreciated how much they derive benefit from the temple, not only would they not have destroyed it, they would have surrounded it with legions to protect it. The temple was the source of both physical and spiritual energy and blessing. And that's why the Talmud says that if you want to be rich, you face the north. That's where the table was in the temple. You want to be smart, you face the south where the menorah was. What happens if you want to be both rich and smart?
You face east.
You get your eyes two ways. You become a chameleon.
East or
Well,
west.
some say that you just face south, because if you're smart, you get rich as well. Or as others say, you go in both directions. You go in a corner. It means you become so nullified that you encompass both directions. But anyhow, that's not my point. My point is that the Talmud was recognizing when it says look to the north, doesn't necessarily mean that a person should face north, because you're supposed to face east if you live in America. That's the direction of Jerusalem. It means that your mind should be focused on the fact that wealth does not come from down here. Wealth comes from up there, and it's channeled through the temple and the temple service, coming through all that until it reaches us. You want to be smart. Wisdom does not come from your own brain. It comes from a higher source, channeled through the temple, through the menorah specifically, into our personalities. That's what you should recognize, that the table was not just a table with bread on it. That was the source of blessing for all of the bread. Bread is a symbol of all material things for everyone. So then that was so we have the ark, and then after that the table, and after that the menorah. And then afterwards it talks about the Mishkan itself, the actual construction of the tabernacle, and goes into great detail, which is a puzzling thing. There is so much detail, the most minute detail of the construction of the Mishkan. And then the next Parsha goes into the priestly garments in great detail. Then the Parsha after that summarizes a lot of what they had to do in building the Mishkan. Then the Parsha after that repeats everything that we just read, because this Parsha is about God telling Moses what to command the Jews. In the two Parshas after this, it tells us that what Moses told the Jews and what they did. And the Parsha after that repeats again what they were told and what they did, and gives a summary of that. So you have 4.5 sections of the Torah that talk about the construction of a building that is defunct, that was replaced by the Beis Hamikdash. In the Messianic age, we won't need the portable sanctuary because we'll have the third temple. So the Mishkan will just be like a museum piece. So why does the Torah devote so much attention to this portable sanctuary, this transient portable sanctuary? So there are many reasons. I'm going to give you the simplest reason, and that is that you have to understand what the circumstances were. The Jewish people were given the Torah at Mount Sinai. They hear directly from God, don't have any other gods. Don't create graven images. Keep away from any vestige of idol worship. Moses goes up on the mountain. 40 days later, what do? They construct a golden calf, and many of them worshipped it. God was understandably very upset. He threatened to annihilate them. Moses pleads with God and gets God to ultimately forgive the Jewish people. So Moses was on the mountain 40 days to bring down the tablets, shatters them, goes up again for 40 days to appease God. God says, okay, go down, bring me some new sapphire. That's what the tablets were made out of. And he goes up for another 40 days until Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, and brings down the second tablets, which was a symbol that God forgave them. But the second tablets were not as grand as the first tablets. How did the Jews know that God really forgave them? That he was willing to dwell with them? Imagine a woman is unfaithful to her husband, and the husband throws her out of the house, and then she asks for forgiveness. How do we know that the husband has forgiven her? When he tells her to move back into the home. Until then, he could say, yes, I forgive you, but stay away. Then when God says to the Jewish people, build for me a sanctuary, and through that sanctuary I will dwell within you, that was the symbol that God had forgiven them and was willing to live with them in the way that he was originally planning to live within them. That was the most incredible message, the most powerful message that the Jews could have gotten, in some ways even more than what happened at Mount Sinai. Because what happened at Mount Sinai was, it was a series of events. God is in love with the people. He takes them out of Egypt, gives them the manna, and it concludes with the giving of the Torah. It's like, everything is building up to a crescendo. And then they blow it all, and it's all over. That's it. Forget about it. God rejects them. And now that God says, I am accepting you the way you were, we reached the level of Baal Tshuva. We became penitence. That's even greater than we were at Mount Sinai. When we were tzaddikim, we were righteous at Mount Sinai. We were completely purified. But this time we were tainted, and we returned to God, and God forgave us. And he showed that he forgave us by telling us to build a Mishkan. That was the greatest source of joy that you could have imagined. And when something is precious, you repeat it over and over and over again. If some event in your life is the most momentous event in your life, you'll tell it to people, and as many times as you tell it, you won't get tired. You'll repeat it over and over and over again. That's the message of the repetition of the Mishkan. That it's a love letter that God has sent us. More than a love letter. He's there with us, and we can't get enough of it. We want to repeat it and look at it from every angle. So that's a little bit of a synopsis of the Parsha. And I know a lot of people find it very boring to read all the details of the Mishkan, but let them just put themselves in the position where they have a relationship, the most important relationship, a parent and a child, and the parent rejects the child, and the child pines to get back in his parent's good grace. And finally the parent allows the child back in and embraces the child. And the child will remember every detail of what the father or mother says to the child. And it's never going to be boring. It might be boring to an outsider, not to an insider. That's a lesson for us in our prayers. Sometimes we get bored with our prayers. We say the same thing 3 times a day, every day. Yes, it's boring from the point of view of getting information, but it's not boring in terms of a relationship. If we pray properly, every word is precious, and every word is filled with love and passion. So have a good evening, and God willing, we'll be back again next week with more sparks on the Parsha.
So what Hashem did after